Happy New Year to everyone from the African Descendant Institute of Human Rights. Happy New Year to my colleague, UN Human Rights Defender Cecile Johnson, who's going to deliver this fine representation on decolonizations and why we should decolonize. And we want to encourage everyone to listen to all of the webinars, which will give you a full picture of what we're doing, how we're doing it, and the outcomes that we are seeking. So thank you very much for participating in your own development and resurrection. I'm going to now introduce the panelists and your presenter, my esteemed colleague, Ms. Cecile Johnson, UN Human Rights Defender. Thank you, Cecile.
Greetings, everyone. Happy New Year and peace and blessings to all of you. Today, I look forward to talking to you a little bit more about the state of the African descendant in the USA and following up with the webinar that we had done, which was number 3, with webinar number 4 on why we should decolonize. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to exit myself from the picture so we can stay focused on what is going on the slides. So today we're going to cover, as you know, this is a continuation of webinar number 3. And when I started before to explain to you through the data, the state of the African descendants and why we must be decolonized. And the first framework we are using is what we call the Human Development Index. So we're going to go along with that today. We're going to continue with that. And then I'm going to introduce another concept to you. What is self-determination? What's the right to development? We're going to go a little bit more into the Human Development Index. And we're going to talk about colonization, the 5 steps to acquiring power, and then steps we're going to take moving forward. So when the people lack vision, the people perish. The reality for African descendants in the USA is that we are a minority in a majority hostile state. We are non-self-governing. The only way a minority can have any power in a majority state is through self-determination. So what is self-determination? This is a concept we've introduced to you before. The right to self-determination is the right of a people to determine their own destiny. The principle allows a people to choose its own political status and to determine its own form of economic, cultural, and social development. Exercise of this right can result in a variety of different outcomes, ranging from political independence through to full integration within a state. Okay? Self-determination is covered in these binding documents: the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights in their common Article number 1. It's also listed in the Declaration on the Right to Development, Article 1. So many of you ask, what's the difference between human rights and civil rights, right? So I want you to look at this slide, and at your own leisure, you're going to be able to go over it. But the basics are that human rights are those that are rights that our individual enjoy because he's human. No government body, group, or person can deprive you of your human rights, right? So some of the basic rights are the right to life, to education, to fair trial, protection from torture, and freedom of expression. And the human rights were conceived after the Second World War when the UN came together and adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So these are universal rights, and the rights are basically inherent with you from birth, and they don't change whether you're in one country or another, and they're universally accepted rights, right? Regardless of your nationality, regardless of your religion or ethnicity. Civil rights are rights that are individual rights enjoyed by virtue of citizenship. So you're born in a particular country, and you're covered by their civil rights. You have protection under their constitution. The civil rights protect the individual from discrimination and unjustifiable actions by others, governments, or other organizations, right? So it is an agreement between the nation, that's their constitution, and you, the individual, who are members and citizens of this country. So they are a creation of society, and they differ from one nation to another. So civil rights basically depend on the laws of the country. On the other hand, civil rights fall within the limits of a country's laws and pertain to the social, cultural, religious, and traditional standards, among other things. So it's very important you understand human rights are God-given rights, right? Doesn't matter what country you're in, you have them. And civil rights are based on your constitution and your government's agreement with you on what they're going to do for you, protect you legally. One of the other concepts we're going to talk a little bit about today is the 5 steps to acquiring power in a community by Dr. Claude Anderson. And when we're looking at the Black community, we got to begin to analyze it from different frameworks. And this is one of the frameworks that I use when I'm looking at data and power, right? So Dr. Anderson says that the first stage is economics, because in the capitalist system, he who has the money buys, sells, rents, and leases politicians. And we see that in what's happening in our communities. The second stage is political. Politicians, once elected, becomes the lawmakers. Their action or inaction will directly impact your community. What kind of representatives will you have? What role will you play in choosing that representative? In this game, you either have money or you have numbers. So how do you get out the vote in your community? The third stage is legal. Legislatures make laws and policies which impact your day-to-day life. Who gives to their campaigns is what influences what policies get implemented. Who controls your legal system? Who are your judges? How is law enforcement in your community, and by whom? Right? So these are things we need to look at. And fourth stage is the media. So you got the TV, radio, advertisement, images, and who shapes how we think about ourselves and our community. When you look at the advertisement that's out there, when you look at the movies that come out through Hollywood, what you see are how we are being framed in a very hostile environment, right? In a way that dehumanizes us and makes people not really care much about us. The fifth stage is education, and this is indoctrination, maintain the status quo. How well are your children performing in the schools? What are they learning? Are they meeting the needs of the Black community? Or are they fulfilling someone else's agenda for you? What skills do your children need to meet your community's needs? These are 5 critical things that we need to be looking at, because if we're not controlling any of these things, then we really have no power in our communities. Now, later on, I'm going to show you a piece of this as it relates to the political scene. So today, we're going to talk about the right to development. This is something that was passed by the United Nations in 1986 under Resolution 41-128. Though the Declaration, the General Assembly recognized development as a comprehensive economic, social, cultural, and political process aimed at the constant improvement of the well-being of all individuals and peoples on the basis of their participation in development and in the fair distribution of its benefits. Now, I've told you before in a previous presentation that when in the past, when we looked at the way the economy was doing, we would say, the economy is good, so the people must be doing well. But what we found was that was not necessarily true, right? And so from this right to development, they created what we call the Human Development Index. And you see that the Human Development Index measures well-being in 3 vital areas: the health, the education, and earnings that shape the opportunities available to people and enable people to invest in their families and to live to their full potential. This is very critical, because it's not just how the economy is doing. If the people are not doing well in the economy, then whoop-de-doo, right? What does it matter? In the case of the United States, you can see that the Human Development Index in 2010 was 5.03. Asians were at 7.21, whites at 5.43, and African Americans and Native Americans are down at 3.81. So what does that mean? It means that our potential, right, our opportunities are not very good. When you look at 10 key cities, Atlanta, Boston, Chicago, Dallas, Houston, Los Angeles, Miami, New York, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C., what you see consistently is that Black and Latino people are consistently at the bottom of the Human Development Index. So today we pick up on number 4, the Human Development Index, the last piece, which is called a decent standard of living. So again, like before, I'm going to give you what that would be from their perspective, and then I'm going to add an African-centered perspective. So third quarter 2018 averages, the median weekly salary for 25 to 50-year-old people, right, based on race. As you can see, Asians are at the highest, then white, Blacks are at the lowest, right, a little bit below the Hispanics, right? So when you look at our average median weekly salary, we're not doing well, okay? Now, history tells us Blacks have not been able to gain much wealth in America, even with more education. And Dr. Claude Anderson shows that when he shows you that right before the end of the eve of the Civil War in 1860, we were 98% illiterate. We owned half of 1% of the economy. And in 1960, when we had increased our literacy, and we were down to 14% illiteracy, we still owned only half of 1% of the economy, right, in the United States. So he says, today, 95%, 98% of all Black people work for whites. You're enjoying a social illusion because you go to someone else's restaurant, but you don't own the restaurant yourself. This is important, right? Because we have educational gains and economic stagnation. So again, because we don't control the educational system that is preparing our young people to be useful to us in our community, we're seeing this. We're also seeing that in the United States, you have a racial wealth gap. White households had 22 times the wealth of the average Black household. Look at this chart. This is coming out of the 2010 census, right? 4,955 versus 110,000. So 22 times the wealth of the average Black household. That's what whites have. And even when you have high earning married Black households on average, have less wealth than low earning married white households, right? So the median net worth for Black households in 2011 was lower than it was in 1984, while white households' net worth had almost gained 11% higher. And in 2016, the nation said the average Black family would need 228 years to build the wealth of a white family today. Now, imagine 228 years, right? So this is very critical. Over the past 30 years, the average wealth of white Americans has grown by 84%, 1.2 times the rate of growth for the Latino population and 3 times the rate of growth for the Black population. In the past 30 years were to repeat, the next 3 decades would see the average wealth of white households increase by over 18,000 per year, while Latino and Black households would only see 2,250 and $750 per year increase for Black households. Over the past 30 years, the wealth of the Forbes 400 richest Americans have grown by an average of 736%, right? 10 times the growth rate for Latino and 27 times the rate of growth for the Black population. Today, the wealthiest 100 members of the Forbes list alone own almost as much wealth as the entire African American population combined, while the wealthiest 186 members of the Forbes 400 own as much wealth as the entire Latino population combined. If average Black households had enjoyed the same growth rate as the Forbes 400 over the past 30 years, they would have an extra $475,000 in wealth today. That's almost $500,000, right? By 2043, the year in which is projected that people of color will make up a majority of the U.S., the wealth divide between white families and Latino and Black families will have doubled on average, from 500,000 in 2013 to over $1 million. So, folks, this is looking very good, right? It's going to take Black families 228 years to amass the same amount of wealth white families have today. That's just 17 years shorter than the 245-year span of slavery in this country. So as we can see, Dr. Ansari likes to call it, deep state racial policies has a plan of zero rate slavery by 2053, right? There's definitely this is their projection. When you look at what's happening for 2020 and for 2024, you can see, again, the gap used to be 22 times. Their income was 22 times. As you can see, it's gone to maybe like 50 times, right? Because we are now both Latino and Black under $2,000 while they're at 122,000. So they would have now been 50 times versus 22 times our rate. So while households of color are projected to reach majority status by 2043, if the racial wealth divide is left unaddressed, the median Black household wealth is on a path to hit zero by 2053. And that's what Dr. Ansari means when he says that we have a plan of zero rate slavery. Because if we have no income, then we will now be and continue to be slaves to the ones who do have income, and they will control everything, right? If current trends continue by 2020, median Black and Latino households stand to lose nearly 18 and 12% of the wealth they held in 2013. In the meantime, white households are going to increase 3%. 2 years from now, white households are projected to own 86 times more wealth than Black households and 68 times more wealth than Latino households. Don't forget that your ancestors built this, right? So here we had a U.S. first black president, but he never pursued policies bold enough to actually close the racial wealth gap. Because the data that I'm giving you is during the time of Obama, right? So we would consider that he failed us. During his time, the study showed little changes since the Kerner Commission report on racism 50 years ago. What did they say? We made progress on virtually every aspect of race and poverty for nearly a decade after the Kerner report, and then the progress slowed and stopped in so many ways. It was reversed, so that today racial and ethnic discrimination is again worsening. We're resegregating our cities and our schools, condemning millions of kids to inferior education and taking away their real possibility of getting out of poverty. So this is 50 years, right? And I showed this to you before, that the school to prison pipeline is how poorly our children are doing. 19% of fourth graders are proficient in math, 13% of eighth graders are proficient in math, 18% of fourth graders are proficient in reading, 16% of eighth graders are proficient in reading, right? Leading to these kind of outcomes where when it looks at college readiness benchmarks, 16% of our black children can read, right? Math 14%, science 10%, and English 34%. And one of the key findings of this United Negro College Fund and American College Testing Program report was that in all 4 subject areas, black high school graduates had a lower readiness benchmark than every other racial or ethnic group. Okay? Now, I said to you in the 5 steps to power, education is a key. And with these kind of outcomes, what future will we have? Now, in 2018, February, there was another report from the Washington Post that said no progress for African Americans on home ownership, unemployment, incarceration in 50 years. And it says that unemployment is now 7.5%, still roughly 2 times the white rate. Home ownership has shown no increase and still trails 30 points behind the white rate. And mass incarceration, right? Black incarceration rate nearly tripled between 1968 and 2016. And this is one of the most depressing things about what has happened to us. Now, we saw a drop in black male unemployment from the 70s to 2000 as jobs were outsourced to other countries and black men were incarcerated through the war on drugs, which was just another name for the war on black people. It's very critical for you to see this, right? So you had a mass decrease in annual weekly earnings from black men. And then the data shows us that black unemployment has consistently been 2 times that of whites. So this is nothing new, folks, right? We're looking here from 1954, we're looking up to 2013. Nothing has changed. When it comes to housing, like I said, 40%. For blacks, 50 years later, still 40%. And then you see that again through the 30s and the 60s, black people ran across the country were largely cut out of the legitimate home mortgage market. Ta-Nehisi Coates addressed this in his The Case for Reparations. It's an article that I would encourage you to read, right? Blacks, they had white flight was not an accident. It was a triumph, they say, of racist social engineering. And how did they do this? Now, this book came out in 2017, The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. And oh my gosh, this was one of the best things. What Rothstein does was he showed you how in the past, scholars and social critics looked at racism in our neighborhoods and they had a view that it was a manifestation of unscrupulous real estate agents, unethical mortgage lenders, and exclusionary covenants working outside the law. This is what is commonly known as de facto or private practices, right? Where the outcome of private, not legal or public policy. But he, in this book, The Color of Law, another book that you need to read, says case after case, until the last quarter of the 20th century, de facto segregation paled in comparison to de jure segregation, which is government-sponsored segregation, legal or public policy that created discriminatory outcomes, byproduct of explicit government policy at the local, state, and federal level. So an example is the FHA policy that guaranteed bank loans only if they included restrictive covenants, required whites-only purchase and no resale to African Americans. So it is your government that did this. So one of the ways that they did this, 2 important policies in the mid-20th century that segregated metropolitan areas was the first civilian public housing program, which frequently demolished integrated house neighborhoods in order to create segregated public housing. And the second was to subsidize the development of the suburbs. The condition that they only be sold to whites, and that the deeds prohibited resale to African Americans, right? So these two policies work to further segregate metropolitan areas in ways that they otherwise would never have been segregated. And the impact for us was how they built wealth for white people. The federal government, look at this. We talk about Levittown and many of these other suburban institute towns, right? These people were allowed to buy homes for $8,000 at a time. That's $100,000 today. Today, they sell these homes for $300,000 to $400,000. So they have an equity of $200,000 to $300,000. That's why you see the gap in the black wealth and the white wealth net worth. Okay, so these homes could not be sold to black people, and they had a restrictive covenant in their deeds. And black people had to live in the inner cities in these rented apartments, prohibited from moving to the suburbs. So they gained none of that appreciation. The federal government subsidized white wealth, right? He proved that in his book. So when we talk about reparations, right, blacks were herded into the sites of unscrupulous lenders who took them for money and sport. This is something that Ta-Nehisi quotes, shows you in the case for reparations. And you need to read that article because you really need to get your mindset into the fact that we are owed reparations and all the things that have happened to this point that show why we need this, what the government's role was in creating the problems that we have today. And then to add insult to injury. So now you actually do get a chance to own a home. And a study just came out in November of 2018 that there was a segregation tax that's costing Black Americans $156 billion, right? So the devaluation of assets in Black neighborhoods, the case of residential property owner occupied homes are undervalued by the real estate market across all majority Black neighborhoods and consistently sell or appraise for lower prices at an average of $48,000 per home. So let me just show you a few. So you have in Atlanta, Sandy Springs, the homes are undervalued, in the Black areas, $48,000 on average, right? Philadelphia, Camden, Wilmington, $36,000 on average, right? When you look at Chicago, Naperville, Elgin, you see $36,000 average devaluation, and Dallas, $46,718 devalued. So again, not only have they prevented us from gaining the wealth, but once we even have the properties, we're still being subjected to a difference in how they perceive us and how they value anything that we have, right? To make sure we have no wealth. Now, mass incarceration. I like to say to people, the 13th Amendment bamboozled us. 13th Amendment says slavery has been abolished except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, right? So really what the 13th Amendment is saying, once you're in jail and you've been duly convicted, you are a slave. So nothing much has changed since after 1865, because what happened is that they put into place vagrancy laws that allowed the police to sweep up Black men and then rent them out as convict labor. So today you see on the picture on the left that you have Black people, 13% of the population, and we are the majority in the criminal injustice system, in the prisons, right? Because then they can use our labor to work even for the federal government and for private industry and pay us pennies on the dollar. Those same people come out of jail and they will have a check the box, right? You have to check the box that you had all these prior incarceration, etc. You can't get the job that while you was in jail you was doing, right? So all of these little games that they have played to disenfranchise us, to keep us in poverty. And the next thing they've done is we see mass incarceration and voter disenfranchisement as a way to keep white nationalist political power. There are 9 states in the United States where an ex-felon can never vote again. Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, Nebraska, Wyoming, Nevada, and Arizona. And in the 2018 election, Florida was one of them, and the voters changed the rules there. So in those 9 states, you need to change the rules. The United States accounts for less than 5% of the world's population, yet we have 25% of the incarcerated, and the majority of these are Black, right? So more than 1 of every 6 Black men today who should be between the ages of 25 and 54 have disappeared from daily living. So now we have these communities where we're missing fathers, we're missing husbands, people who would have been leaders, all of this, right? And Black children under 18 are more likely to be in families who are living in poverty and headed by single mothers. 57% of school-age Black children live with a single mother. In the last 100 years, starting in the 1900s, Black people had one of the highest marriage rates. Today, we're down to like 33% of these children. Two-parent households are stable, have better income and better likelihood of the children being more successful. And that's not happening in our community because the federal government had a war on drugs, which is a war on us, and decimated our communities, right? 1.5 million men missing. So some other root causes, right? So this little cartoon sums it up. When the entirety of your earnings are exhausted on food and shelter, your labor are no longer viewed as an opportunity for economic advancement, but rather as an act of self-preservation in the real world that's called slavery. And remember the slide where I showed you that when it comes to the weekly earnings, Black people, men and women, have the lowest weekly earnings. So part of this problem has to do with how long does the dollar circulate in the Black community. And the Black Youth Project had done a study in 2014, and it said that it circulated 6 hours in our community, right? 30 days in the Asian community, 20 days in the Jewish community, and 17 days in the overall white community. And what does that mean? If the dollar is not circulating in your community, that means that you don't own the businesses in your community and you don't own that wealth, which leads to why we see the racial wealth gap, right? So how many Black businesses are in the Asian and Arab community, right? In the white community, in the Latino community? Look around. What do you see? These people are practicing self-determination. So my question to you is, shouldn't African descendants be practicing that too? Right? So this question of how long the dollar stays in your community, we have a right to ask that question. Because if we don't ask that question, then we will continue to have all these other people come into our community where opportunity exists, but somehow they're the ones we're getting, right? So African descendants, like it says here, don't you think it's time to wake the hell up, right? Black consumer spends $1.4 trillion, and very little of that goes to Black businesses. So because of all the things that I have shown you up to this point, we see that poverty is a major issue for Black people. In the United States, our poverty rate is 24%, while for whites, it's 9%. Hispanics, 21%, and for others, 14%. And when you look at some of the key states, Alabama, Arkansas, California, DC, what you see, Georgia, 31%, Illinois, 23%, Michigan, 26%, right? Louisiana, 31%. So we have an issue of poverty that is impacting us based on the fact that we have such poor economics, poor education. All of these things lead to that. So this gets to the heart of what we're talking about here today. This is why we should decolonize and what is the right to development under international law. So the right to development is anchored in legally binding instruments. This is what you need to remember. In 1986, the General Assembly adopted the Declaration on the Right to Development, right? And the declaration, though in itself is not legally binding, it is tied, it is anchored in legally binding instruments, such as the Charter of the United Nations and the International Covenants on Human Rights. And principles like non-discrimination and state sovereignty are also part of customary international law, which is binding on all states. So when you look at the Declaration on the Rights of Development, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, Indigenous and Tribal People Conventions, and the ILO, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, and the Protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the Right of Women in Africa. These are all legal international law instruments that are legally binding, and the right to development is in them. So what I'm going to show you in the next few slides, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, is I'm just taking out each area of the right, the principles in the Declaration, and showing you how it also has provisions in other binding instruments, right? So self-determination is covered under the International Covenant of Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and also on civil and political rights, right? Common Article 1. The Declaration on the Right to Development talks about the improvement of human well-being, right? Articles 1 to 4 and 8. And then it's also in the Charter of the UN, also in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, on the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, on the Convention on the Rights of the Child, Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, right? So this right is in binding instruments. So its participation is in the same covenants that we talked about before. At your leisure, have a chance to look up some of these covenants, right? Those of you especially who are very interested in human rights and learning human rights. I'm breaking this down for you because this is, we're giving you some programs, free classes on human rights. And so when you become a human rights defender or a human rights monitor, you're going to have to get more detail into this, right? You're going to have to be able to break down what is happening and how it ties into other provisions, binding instruments, in order to make your case. So non-discrimination is covered, and I'm giving you the binding instruments. Cooperation among states, tied to the Charter of the UN, same International Covenant, Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, Conventions on the Rights of the Child. Elimination of massive and flagrant violations of human rights, again, and the instruments that it is covered in. Disarmament, and as you can see, all of the different binding instruments that it's covered in. Access to public services. New international economic order. So since 1986, this declaration has provided normative underpinnings for a human-centered approach to development. Human development and human rights are embedded and reinforce each other conceptually and in practice, helping to secure the well-being and dignity of all people. So what is the right to development, right? I've given you a lot of depressing data, I know. I know when I show this, the doctor is sorry, he's like, oh, I'm overwhelmed. Okay. But it's important. It's important for you to understand where we are at, that we have no choice but to take our rights into our own hands, right? So what is the right to development? Article 1 of the Declaration states that the right to development is an inalienable human right by virtue of which every human person and all peoples are entitled to participate in, contribute to, and enjoy economic, social, cultural, and political development, in which all human rights and fundamental freedoms can be fully realized. The human right to development also implies the full realization of the people to self-determination, which includes subject to the relevant provisions of both international covenants and human rights. They have to exercise their inalienable right to full sovereignty over their natural wealth and resources, right? So it's a virtue, it's an inalienable right that every human being and all people are entitled to. We're entitled to self-determination, and we're entitled to full sovereignty over all our natural wealth and resources. So the key elements to the right of development are people-centered development, human rights approach, participation, equity, non-discrimination, and self-determination, right? The people-centered development identifies the human person as the central subject, participant, and beneficiary of development. That's you, that's us, right? It says that the human rights approach, the declaration requires that development be carried out in a manner in which all human rights and fundamental freedoms can be fully realized. The participation insists on active, free, and meaningful participation of individuals and populations in development. When you look at what has been happening to us, things have been done to us, at us, and allegedly for us. But we need to be able to actively participate in a free and meaningful way in our own right to development. The equity highlights the fair distribution of the benefit of development. And as you can see, based on the data that I just explained to you, that whites in this country have disproportionately benefited. So there has not been any fair distribution of the benefits. And it wasn't because they could run faster and do things better. It was because the government put into place policies that created this, reinforced this. Okay? So the declaration allows no distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion. And we see where the government has put into play clauses that banned us from access that they gave to white people. And self-determination requires the full realization of the right of people to self-determination, including full sovereignty over their natural wealth and resources. We have told you in previous presentations that we are indigenous to this land. The slavery was like the fourth migration. And so this concept here of full sovereignty over their natural wealth and resources is going to be something very important for us now and in the future. So who are the right holders, right? And the duty bearers of this right to development? As with human rights, human beings, we are the right holders, right? The right to development is from an individual and a collective right. The human person is the central subject of development and should be the active participant and beneficiary of the right to development. That means that these development programs and policies must be centered on us, right? As it relates to the Black community, we have a right to have policies that are being implemented be focused on us, because the data shows that there is a difference based on race. And it must be aimed at the benefit and the constant improvement of our well-being. And who are the duty bearers? The right to development imposes duty on the state and the international community, as well as on all those whose actions and or omissions have an impact on human rights and on the environment in which these rights are to be fulfilled. So that's you, the world. That's you, right? The state and the international community. We're asking the international community to see what is happening to us here as African descendants in the United States. And that here we are in a developed country, and look at how we live, like we're living in a developing country right here in the United States. So states have the primary responsibility for respecting, for protecting, and fulfilling human rights, including for creating national and international conditions favorable to the realization of the right to development. This means that they have a primary responsibility for providing an enabling environment for equitable development, both locally and globally. We do not see that here in the United States for Black people. States also have a right to formulate appropriate national development policies that aim at the constant improvement of the well-being of the entire population and of all individuals. And again, we do not see that for Black people here in the United States. So the state's responsibility, right? The states have to fulfill, they have to work together with a view to strengthening the realization of human rights, have the duty to cooperate with each other in ensuring development and eliminating obstacles, and they should fulfill their duties in a manner to promote a new international economic order based on sovereign equality, interdependence, mutual interest, and cooperation among states. So they have three levels: internally, internationally, and collectively, right? So internally, through formulation of national development policies and programs affecting persons within their jurisdictions. That has not happened. We have all these studies, we have all these, they give us these things that they're allegedly going to do, but always the outcome is never anything positive, right? So we have given them enough times we've been here. This is 400 years. We're in 2019, right? 400 years of Anglo invasion and oppression, right? And look at the state of us today. So obviously, they have not formulated national development policies that were favorable to us. They have, in fact, formulated policies that were unfavorable. Internationally, through the adoption and implementation of policies extending beyond their jurisdictions. And we see this in how, the state treats other people of color globally, right? And collectively through global and regional partnerships. So even though we're living in the United States, which is a so-called first world country, developed nation, we have within the United States a Black population who is suffering from underdevelopment. So what does this have to do with the private sector and non-state actors? Well, the obligation to protect implies that the state should protect individuals and groups against violation of their human rights by third parties. So it will impact private sector and other non-state actors, right? And again, some of these slides, at your leisure, I want you to read some of them, right? The responsibility for development and duties towards the community which the Declaration places on all human beings entail that such responsibility are shared by all relevant actors and organs of society, including the private sector and civil society. So, private sector should also contribute to creating conditions favorable to the realization of the right to development. That's the bottom line. They have to, the state has to make sure that they are in compliance. So remember I told you about the 5 steps to acquiring power, right? So I only put this up again to remind you, because now I'm going to talk a little bit more about one of those stages, which is political. So what is colonization? That was one of our terms that we're learning today. A process by which a central system of power dominates the surrounding land and its components. It's a people or state that have been subject to colonial rule by a foreign metropolitan power. Now let us look. In 2016, when we had this election, actually you had, this is what I call what colonial rule looks like in the United States for African descendants. We are 13% of the population, and yet we only have 3 senators, right? When you look at the representation in the House of Representatives, we have 46. We had 46 congressmen at the time, which was 10.5%. I'm going to talk a little bit later about even when we had the 10.5%, they did nothing for us, right? So when you look at the disproportionate representation based on race, you see that you have blacks, 3 senators, right? We're 13% of the population, which you have 13 senators. Latinos have 4 senators. But really and truly, look at these people. Menendez, Rubio, and Cruz. And I give a little waiver there for Cortez Masto, right? But these are guys who are coming from the colonial, these are Europeans these are Cubans, but they were coming from Europe, right? So they are not Latino like they're a minority. These guys have risen to prominence. Why? Because they are white. So in reality, 93% of the Senate is white, right? And I might add in Catherine, but I'm not quite sure, right? So what we're saying from this is that we have not had any adequate representation here as Black people in the United States. And this chart, in 152 years, we've had 10 senators. 10 senators, 152 years. There was a time from 1881 to 1967, we had no senators at all, right? And at that time, we had states where we were 58% of the population, South Carolina, 48% of the population, Mississippi, and we had no representation at all, right? This is time during the Jim Crow time, when they found a way to negate the 1865 13th Amendment, which allegedly set us free. Why is this important? Because we're trying to show you that we've participated in the system, right? But we haven't gained anything from it. African descendants must be politically able to focus on our own development. And from the data that I've shown you, clearly we do not have enough political power in the current system to improve our well-being. The human person is a central subject of development and should be the active participant and beneficiary of the right to development. Well, can we develop with this kind of poor representation? So recently, we have Black representatives who do not represent the Black community. So Bobby Rush from Chicago faced a backlash as his CBC voting record goes viral, right? And that's what you all need to learn to do. You need to look at their voting records and see who is really representing us, right? 80% of the Black Democrats in the U.S. House voted for continued militarization of local police forces. And 4 years later, 75% of these same Black Democrats gave protected class status to cops. Then we must conclude that the intervening period of Black Lives Matter agitation has had no effect on Black Democratic Party politics. And further, that the caucus is wholly and brazenly unaccountable to its constituents. So I showed you, we are 10% of the Congress, but we might as well be 0% of the Congress, because the way the Black congressmen vote is not in our best interest, okay? So we cannot have any representation. We are like a simple minority in the system, right? When we are really a national minority. We are a national minority where those who were here at the creation of this country were also indigenous people. And our rights cannot be, we're not getting any rights. We're being subjugated to other people's views and opinions because we are a small minority in a majority driven system. So that is why those congressmen and those senators, even that though they're there, still come up with the same outcomes that the majority system wants. And then you see in the United States, every election we have to keep fighting over and over for the same rights, right? Why? Why do we still have to do this? Now, this mass incarceration or photo disenfranchisement is very important. This is how they have kept power. The white nationalists have kept power. And you see this, what happened in Georgia, and you see that happening in Florida, especially in Georgia, where votes weren't counted. And the guy who was actually running for governor is the same guy who was actually the Secretary of State. So, he's making those decisions. But in Georgia, you also have these rules where if you are a prisoner, or you are in you're part of the probation system, you can't vote. So they have found ways, and again, since we are the majority of people who are incarcerated, not necessarily because we are more criminal, right? But 95% of federal cases are plea bargain, 97% of state cases are plea bargain, and many times people don't, they take the plea because if they go to trial, they make an example of you and give you some extraordinary 60 years, etc. So we see that mass incarceration to us and voter disenfranchisement is a way for them to have kept political power. They have found ways to hold us powerless in our own country. So, like I said, we were bamboozled, right? So, in 2016, no, in 2017, there was a special rapporteur who came from the UN, and he talked about the undermining of democracy in the United States. The foundation stone of American society is a democracy, so they claim, right? But it's been steadily undermined. The principle of one person, one vote applies in theory, but it's far from reality. And so he addresses there are requirements that people who have paid their debt to society still cannot regain their right to vote until they paid off all outstanding fines and fees. Then there's covert disenfranchisement. Then there's dramatic gerrymandering, right? I mean, anything and everything that they can do, they have done. The imposition of artificial unnecessary voter IDs, the blatant manipulation of polling station locations. Many of you have seen those videos that have been running all over the web after the last election, right? It was a fiasco. And we live in America, an America who will then turn to other nations in the world and talk about their elections, right? Their democracy, their human rights. So let's look at major Black cities and political representations. In the areas where we are majority, we want real political control, not the farce we currently have, right? So I'm going to show you this slide, and those of you at home, you can make it big so you can really see. And what that shows you is the total congressional seats per state. And then when you look, even in the places where we have large Black population, we have one congressman, two congressmen, right? So the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are a duopoly. They both the same people, right? And when you look at even in the Black belt, how little representation we have, you ask yourself, how is that possible? That we are majority in many of these cities and we have no representation because they gerrymander you out of your political space, and it's a setup, right? So we cannot no longer continue to participate in just this. This is an injustice. They create laws to disenfranchise us in states where we have large populations. Look at the areas where are red, right? That's the places where you have all these restrictions. But shoot, you go up to Maine and Rhode Island, you can vote while you're in jail. So if we live in one United States, why is it that in the predominantly white areas, you will see that? So this is our reality, folks. We're a minority in a majority hostile state. We're non-self-governing. The only way that minority can have power in a majority state is through self-determination. A confederation, which is what we have formed, is a political strategy that changes configuration from a national minority to a majority in our areas, right? So what I need from you, you've listened to all of this. Some of it is depressing, but it's not, right? It's that we have to understand our reality so we can then take action to change that reality. So what I need for you to do is to sign those declarations of self-determination, right? We'll be defined as African descendants until our parliament decides differently. We've already signed a declaration of self-determination, and we're looking for you to join your signature to this. We then will have the authority to form an interim government. That's what your signature page looks like. You can go onto adconfederation.com and download it. You can go onto africandevelopmentplan.org and download it. You can take a picture once you've signed it and send it back to us, right? At adselfdetermination at protonmail.com. Or you can scan it in, PDF it, and send it back to us. Key is we need your signatures, right? Because as Marcus Garvey said, we're going to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery, because while others may free the body, none but ourselves can free our minds. This presentation that we're doing is about helping you to see how you have to free your mind. Free your mind so you can free your body. So what's step 2? An interim government then can create a national assembly, right? They'll discuss the Articles of Confederation. They'll sign Articles of Confederation. They will have now perfected an interim government. This interim government is selected, not elected. It then has a duty to hold a plebiscite vote within a reasonable time. It will come up with the criteria, right? age 18 African American, right, citizens. So what we want you to do is to go to our website, adconfederation.com, and be a part of the census, right? Include yourself in our nation. Step 3 will then be the interim government has a duty and authority to hold a plebiscite vote. So what is a plebiscite vote? A plebiscite vote is a vote by which the people of an entire country or district express an opinion for or against a proposal, especially on a choice of government or ruler. So we're going to have a vote to determine the community's support for self-government. It's an election to authorize the seating of a parliament who will form a constitution. And the elected government assembly will have the ability to address remedies that will make our community whole again. The elected government will now have the authority to begin negotiations with the United States to form a free association. And I'm going to go into what a free association is in the next slide, okay? So then we're going to hold this plebiscite vote. So we're building our nation by consent, and you are participating with your signature. So you're joining on. This is going to give the African descendant population a power of authority. This will take us from interim government to the seating of a constitutional government. This political move will increase our wealth to become the 12th wealthiest nation in the world based on GDP. Did you hear that? This political move will increase our wealth to become the 12th wealthiest nation in the world based on GDP. So when you don't join in and we don't move this agenda, we're leaving money on the table, right? Because we're indecisive. UN monitors will be added to our monitors during this process. This ties into the UN Working Group's recommendations. The UN group says that we can make recommendations, but the people on the ground have to take the steps to enforce them. That's what we are doing. We're helping to facilitate the next step. This confederation will seek a compact of free association agreement with the United States so that it will be self-governed. What exactly does this look like? Many of you have asked in the past, well, what does this mean? You're worried about whatever little things you think you have right now. Well, guess what? You're not going to lose any of those little things, okay? Free association means a state manages its own laws and has a special relationship with a majority independent state. So that would be us having a relationship with the United States, and we'll be dual citizens. They're going to share the citizenship and provide economic assistance and defense. So the negotiable issues with the United States are on the left: national security, crime, criminal justice matters, economic relations, reparations, because that's not off the table, okay? Communications, foreign affairs, diplomatic relations, immigration, environmental protection, interstate transportation, coin, money. The African Descendant Confederation will establish its own local government, raise taxes, establish and maintain schools, regulate trade between the Confederates, right? Conduct elections, establish a central bank. We can borrow money, provide for public safety, provide for public welfare. The Confederation will be a shared sovereignty. You will be dual citizens. You're not giving up anything, you're gaining so much more. So when you look at how this funding will be negotiated and reconfigured, right now, money comes through the state, federal government to the state, and then I say the Confederation because you are members of the Confederation. And as those individual members or groups of communities, money comes down to your community. So we want the money to come down from the federal government to the Confederation, similar to what it does with Native Americans, who they call Native Americans. In reality, many Black people in the United States are Native Americans. And then as a country, as a nation, within the United States, a sovereign nation, we will be able to enter into relations with other states and other countries. That's going to open up a lot of opportunities for us to be able to do dealings with the Caribbean, Africa, South America, right? Because now we'll be able to control that for ourselves. So I need you to sign the signature page. I need you to sign saying that you are part of our declared consent for self-determination and our request for decolonization. October 1st, 2017, we signed the Declaration of Self-Determination. And I think it was September or October in 2018, we actually sent a request for decolonization to the United Nations, right? So we need you to join us. We need you to go to the website. We have a book called The Process, Civil Rights to Human Rights, and we need you to be a part of the census. We need you to organize community meetings. We need to begin to vision what your community should look like. We want you to get involved so you can save our children. We want you to read this book so you could form a little book club, because what the book does is it breaks down one of our legal arguments. It's a legal treatise why we say what we're saying and why we're taking this. We see this as the only way we'll ever be able to get our reparations and rebuild our communities and save ourselves. So we want you to get that book, purchase it, form a book club, get involved, organize community meetings. You have to begin to vision what should your community look like, right? Milton Friedman says all crisis creates change. The change that occurs from the ideas that are lying around. He says our goal is to create those ideas. So when the politically impossible becomes politically inevitable, they are implemented. Well, guess what? That's our goal also, right? Our goal is to create those ideas. So when the politically impossible, that's right now, becomes politically inevitable. We're in the time of Trump, right? And the whole world is seeing what he has done. And it's not just what he has done, but what America has done and who America really is, right? And so this is a good opportunity, a time to get involved, go to the website, purchase the book, be a part of the census, right? Donate to the Confederation. This work that we're doing needs funding. You have people out there who can afford to help with the work that we're doing. Please donate to the Confederation. This will be used to do the facilitation work that we're doing right now. And then those of you who are in colleges and organizations, your churches, invite us out. Invite us out, right? Get your college to invite us out so we can talk about this that we have just presented on and in much more detail. African Descendant Institute of Human Rights is scheduling its 2019 college speaking engagements, right? So we want to be able to talk to you more about history has been made as a result of filing a prima facie request to decolonize in the United Nations, showing that the African descendant in the United States are unlawfully restrained in encapsulated racial colonies. Many of you, the ability to decolonize will allow us to direct funding to improve our infrastructure, housing, land, wealth, education, environment, security, and communications as an emerging insular nation. Invite us out to speak so you can understand this critical filing and how you can be involved. Learn more about our democracy project and role in the facilitation of African descendant nation. This is very critical because we need the colleges and universities to be educating people to remedies, right? To solutions, not the same old thing that's been going on now for 400 years. It's time in the year 2019 for you to understand what's happening to us, the role that we have taken, understand our democracy project, and get your students geared in and involved so that they can be ready for this 21st century, right? The time of tremendous change. That's what's going to be happening here in the United States. So if you got political science, pre-law, criminal justice, African American urban studies, indigenous studies, journalism, and just people who are curious about careers in human rights, please get your college, invite us out to speak. We can come out for a day or more, and we can do half days, whole days. We can talk. So Dr. Ansari's email is on this slide. So please reach out to us. We are excited about what we're doing. We are honored to be part of the facilitation, and we really do appreciate just being here at this time to be able to do something to take our people to another journey, to another level, you know. And we look forward to sharing more of that with you. So this is the end of my presentation. I hope you understand what we have just gone over. We've gone over the decolonization. We've gone over what that means, what colonization means, what self-determination means, what the right to development means, and how it has legal backing behind it. And then we have talked about what we need to do right now. So sign that declaration. Go to our website, adconfederation.com, right? www.adconfederation.com. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cecile. Excellent, 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 excellent presentation. This is one of our UN human rights defenders that we are so very proud of for being able to articulate what our position is as far as our standing in the United States is to be free people. We have the unfettered right to be free. And free is a really a word that is chock full of expectations for our children, expectations for ourself, a release of our personality, a release of our power, a release of our community, the grip on our communities. That's freedom. When we can obtain the power over our communities, the power of decision, the power to protect, have our own police force. And I'm going to do a upcoming seminar on the police power and why we must obtain the police power. And just a hint of that is that the police power is connected to political power, and police power is connected to economic power. So we must have freedom. We must have the freedom to develop. We are so very undeveloped. Many of our communities in the South, and especially in the Delta, Mississippi, and Alabama, are like third world countries, outhouses, but chock full of millions of acres of land in which we can develop. It's our obligation to be free and to really understand freedom. Freedom is not electing a white authority. Freedom is not being a part of the Democratic Party, because that's not freedom. Freedom is electing your own officials, not the Democratic officials, or an official to be part of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party are white nationalists, just like the white Republican Party. Why? Simple definition is that they're looking out for the interest of white people. That's obvious. Barack Obama, white nationalist. Why? Not because of his skin color, because he was looking out for the interest of white people. Bobby Rush, who was a former member of the Black Panther Party, turned opportunist, turned a self-aggrandizing person, voted for guns and weapons to have the police power over us in our neighborhoods. Same way with the Congressional Black Caucus. Many of them voted for military weapons in our communities so that the police could have power over us. They didn't think about this when they voted. It was just, okay, Bill, I'll give you a vote. You give me a vote. They're playing politics. And that's not freedom. Electing someone to play politics, electing Barack Obama, who was the main playful one, who was very disgusting in the fact that he supported reparations. So why he didn't support? He supported Israeli reparations at the same time that he was denouncing Black reparations in America for a crime that was 100 times worse than the 3 to 4 years of the so-called Holocaust. Our crime was 400 years. And this is the end of, this is 2019. The lack of freedom became or started by the English oppression in 1619. This is 2019. This is 400 years later. And this is the beginning of white rule. When we talk about self-determination, we're talking about true, unadulterated, unapologetic freedom. Your children, my children, Cecile's children, all of our children have the right to be free at birth. They have that right. And we must give them that right. Do not delay. Sign the declaration. Become a part of the Confederation. We must do
That's
that.
right.
Thank you so much, Cecile. Thank you so much. We will return to our people and this message in the upcoming webinars. We want you to have a happy new year. We are growing, we are getting stronger, but we need those declarations because that's how we grow. That's how we get stronger. That's how we obtain freedom. Because we will not hesitate. In fact, we're waiting to take your word, your declarations, and present our case, our situation, our remedies in front of the highest courts in the world, and that's the United Nations. And we're ready, we're prepared. My colleagues are prepared. Cecile is prepared. Elaine is prepared. Our rest of our lawyers, our rest of our human rights defenders are prepared. We're waiting on you. Sign those declarations. Come to the webinars. Ask questions. Get involved. We will show you how to take over and have plebiscites in your local areas, whether it's a small town of 10,000 to a big town like Chicago or Detroit. We're moving in Detroit right now to remove that city council and replant them with our own city council. If you live in an area that is majority African descendants, you have no excuse for being a member of the Democratic Party and let the Democratic rule that area. You must become a part of the Confederation if you desire true freedom. Thank you very much. We will be back. This is 2019. Let's move. Let's be successful. Happy New Year. Thank you so much, Cecile. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
You.
And thank
power
you.
To the people. You're
power
powerful.
To the people. Yes.
Power to
thank
the people.
You. Thank you, sister.